to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a thrilling journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the enigmatic mysteries of the past, and the uncharted territories of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together, we'll unravel the intricate tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean. And today we're going to talk about consciousness.
We are. This is episode 6.
This is episode 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're moving.
We are moving along. I hope you all have been enjoying so far.
Yeah, those of you still here from episode 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of an informal conversation about consciousness a little bit.
Yeah, we're not necessarily...
We're not like deep into study about these things, but we've definitely come across a lot of things that
there's a lot of interesting thoughts and things to talk about from like the mainstream scientific sort of theory to some of the alternate ones, things that affect consciousness.
I gotta clean my glasses. Yeah. So how do we want to start this?
Maybe we can start by just asking the big question, like, what are we talking about when we talk about consciousness? And everyone throws around the term, and, you know, I think people have different
surface level
sort of understandings of what you're attempting to explain when you say the word.
Right. Yeah, that's a good place.
And that's one of the weird things about consciousness is that it's almost just as hard to define as it is to explain.
Right. To explain what it is to be conscious. Or to explain consciousness itself.
Well, to explain how it works, but like even defining it is kind of slippery.
Because you're defining it from within it, you know, like you're not abstractly or from a third person point of view kind of looking at it, you're in it, you're experiencing it.
Yeah, like our language. So like you could try
that's a good place to...
You could try and describe consciousness. I mean, if I were to try myself, like, and someone asked me, my best attempt would be, when I say consciousness, what I mean is like this feeling of being a being inside your head, having experiences, like a first personness, like a subjectivity, like a, you know, like a...
That's what makes you conscious, yes, necessarily, right? Like being able to be that man in the cave stuck in the skull, you know, that the thing within the physical, like you're the non-physical within the physical body. Because you honestly probably relate personally, obviously, because it's your consciousness, but you probably would relate more to the feeling of being a body more than the body itself, right? So like all the organisms that make up our body, like you don't think about what it is to be a bacteria or, you know, gut enzyme or, you know, all these different aspects that make up your body.
Right, but if you zoom in and go into one of those cells, like it could have its own sort of form of consciousness.
Right.
Like cellular biology does seem to, like when you know, study microbes and whatnot under the microscope, like they seem to, they at least have behavior, right? Like, so.
Yeah, they have an intrinsic thing that they're trying to accomplish,
Yeah, like if you drop them on a dish and you put, you know, food on one side and toxins on the other, they're going to go towards the food, right? Like,
yep.
And they can sort of like respond to input and stimulus. And so those are some of the like metrics that we use to like tell that something else is conscious in a way.
It's true. Yeah, it's just a much more basic form of it, I guess, right? It's not as complex.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean,
it
seems like the more you study like microbiology, like the more complicated it gets. Like,
yeah, I don't know much about microbiology or like what the biology is, the characteristics of it necessarily, but
yeah,
at least of everything, but
just all them like molecules and chemistry and DNA.
If you go small enough, right, you go down to the quarks and, you know, the quantum level, right? The things that make up us.
Right. Yeah. And you could like look at quantum physics and be like, you know, because there's the whole issue in quantum physics of the collapse of the wave function, right?
Yeah.
Like they've got this like set of math that can describe all the ranges of potential motion of a particle. And then when they go to observe it, it will be in one of those range of positions that function had set out. So we know the function is valid and it produces like accurate statistics.
But predictability is zero.
Predicting exactly like where in that wave function it will be at any given point ahead of time, like is it proved elusive.
Right.
And so they sort of like have this understanding that something causes the wave function to collapse.
Right.
And that could almost be interpreted as like, is that like a choice? Is that like a conscious act? So consciousness could go that far down.
I mean, to jump back a little bit, though.
That's pretty abstract.
Yeah. I mean, it could go it can go all the way. I mean, everything we know that there is a limit. Oh, well, I guess we don't know that there's a limit, but infinity, like it could be infinite, like infinitely small that this whole world that we live in goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be that you go small enough and it's like some, you know, singularity that takes you to another universe. Obviously, we just can't know. But like to jump back a little bit to the organisms and like whether they have consciousness, the organisms that make up a human body, and that kind of relates to that that idea that we talked about in the last episode, the idea of what was it? Let me look back on my notes here.
From the Secret History?
Yeah. Oh, the Panpsychism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what it was. The panpsychist view that consciousness is intrinsic in all matter,
mm-hmm.
and that we are a complex formation of matter when you think about all the particles that we are made of. And if you think about the consciousness aspect of it, if everything is like we are a collection of consciousness that are forming in this form to and it has a singular like drive, right? Like there is almost another thing outside of consciousness if you were to believe this panpsychist theory, right? If everything has consciousness, then all the particles have consciousness, that when they come together and form patterns, that all of their consciousness collect and
right, that they all contribute to some sort of larger consciousness.
So whether they're conscious within our bodies or they create, like they are the amalgamation that create our consciousness, all of those consciousnesses coming together in this form.
Yeah.
Or consciousness isn't the driver that we think it is of our brains.
There
also might be something else, like a soul that has a completely detached, like almost like an antenna. Like the radio signal is not, like the antenna is not the radio signal that's being transmitted.
Right.
It's just a piece of the puzzle. So maybe our consciousness that forms is the antenna, and there's something else that attaches to it to create what
like the brain, the body is the antenna.
Right. Which could be the consciousness too.
Right.
If you think about it that way. That's the panpsychist kind
so
of view.
Weird, like because like where do we even build our understanding of consciousness? And then that like goes back to the sort of arguments I made at the beginning of the economics episode too. Is like is just the idea that I think, therefore I am type deal. It's like kind of the basis. It's kind of the only thing we can know for certain is that I am here. I do exist. So like consciousness is like the primary fact before any other thing can be addressed in life, right? Like,
well, it depends on your determination of the word consciousness, though, or your definition of the word consciousness, though, because consciousness is still technically a word that is used in association with a certain thing. So depending on the way you use it, it could change whether it's still consciousness or if we should make up some new term for it. You know, like that was that was what I was kind of getting at with the idea that consciousness might be, like, if you're thinking about, like, this is strictly panpsychism, and I kind of like it. I'm kind of playing with it lately, this whole panpsychism theory, and like the idea that consciousness created matter, and you know, it's an intrinsic, you know, value of matter, I guess, in the universe. But yeah, it's interesting to think that way and like to try to like see if that makes sense, you know, or like play with the idea a little bit. So yeah, this is all kind of off the top of my head that I've been playing with in my own mind, but
yeah. But like, there seems to be some sort of like nesting ability, right? Like, because it seems like cells at least have some sort of rudimentary form of consciousness, right? So like, is our consciousness just a metaphor for their collective action? Like, is it actually them that's conscious and our existence is sort of an illusion? But according to our experience, that isn't it, because of the whole I think therefore I am. Like, before you even know that you're composed of cells, you know that you exist, you know?
True, right. Or so, do you know what it means to exist? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, all you know is that like you are here.
Yeah.
There's something happening, you know?
Yeah, I guess at that point you wouldn't know that there might be something else either.
Yeah, like you find yourself in a condition that there's a world and there's you know? And you have senses that seem to map onto things happening outside in the world, and you have you.
Yeah. And
you kind of look out of these eyes and into the world, and it's the only thing you can know for sure. And building up any knowledge from that, like...
Well, I'll give you something.
Okay.
So I was reading the book The Four Agreements. And like that whole idea of like, from the moment you're born, you're hit by the world with all these agreements and all these unconscious like agreements that you're making. So like, even from the second you're born, like you can't even see yet, and you're already auditory, like your senses are there, and yeah, they're useful for what we know they're useful for, but could they, or have they ever been useful for a different reason, or been trained in a different way to see the world a different way? You know what I'm saying? Like, the language, the things you're told from the moment you're born, the things you're taught, like, it's all comes together to form who you become. So your idea of the world, the way the color tint you see the world in, is oftentimes tinted by the type of information you've been grown up with.
Sure, that can influence how you interpret the world you're seeing, right? But I don't think any of that messes with the fact that you're seeing a world and that you're seeing yourself separate from it. You're experiencing. That is the primary thing.
Of course, but I'd throw the example of like that snippet we read from Secret History of the World 2, where it was the short walk through the woods, and like what it might be to see the world and through those eyes.
It would be a totally different experience.
You know you're in a world, you know you're experiencing things, you know but your senses are picking up on different things based on the information that you have been taught and that you were grown up with.
Right.
So like, if you're from the beginning, you know that your sight is a interface to the vibrations of the molecular structure, you know, like, even if there was some kind of scientific knowledge, which, you know, we're starting to understand that there may have been a more advanced historical, you know, society, before like the Younger Dryas impact and all that. Like there could have been understanding back then of a different world, or there was a completely different world.
I understand what you're saying, but it's still secondary to the fact that you're conscious in the first place, right? Like,
of course,
you have to.
Well, yeah.
Be able to experience before your experience can be influenced.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right?
There still has to be that.
The reason I brought up, like, do the cells create our consciousness is because, like, because you can go the other way with it, too. You can go macro with it. Like, there's, like, certain theories, and just in our, like, everyday language, we talk about, like, Walmart's doing this, Amazon is doing that, Tesla is doing this. And that's all like metaphorical language because in actual fact, there is nothing called Tesla. Tesla is an arrangement, a network of individual humans that all do little tiny tasks that add up to the total that we call Tesla. Right?
Tesla is not a singular thing, singular thing.
Us using this term Tesla and ascribing behavior and intent, it almost makes us understand it in our head as if this metaphor called Tesla is a conscious entity out there in the world making decisions, having experiences, reacting to the world. And so some scientists, I've heard people, philosophers maybe, like debate, like, is that truly a conscious entity? Is a network of humans collected together and working towards a common goal?
Is it its own consciousness?
Does that give rise to a sort of super consciousness that you could call, for instance, Tesla? So is Tesla conscious?
What's funny is Elon Musk has mentioned stuff like that too, where he's talked about, I think it was on Joe Rogan, he talked about how like we are basically cyborgs and we are like this giant neural network. Now that we have the internet, we're like this giant neural network of the world that is like all tapped into this technology thing, this and we're all making moves to make this go forward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. That reminds me of like, those operations that have been done on people who are like completely paralyzed, and like you can implant like diodes or whatever into the brain so that the brain can like operate a mouse.
No, I haven't seen this.
You haven't seen this?
No.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it's been done multiple times by now because it's over a decade old. But basically, yeah, like your brain has the ability to, if you put some like,
they put probes
wires
in the brain,
like electrodes into the brain that can send and
areas
receive
of motion.
Electrical signals, the brain neurons will end up wiring to it and sending and receiving from those electrodes. And the person with the implant can then learn how to think in such a way that it results in the cursor moving on a screen so they can select letters and like type out and speak, even though they're completely paralyzed and can't talk, have no motor function.
But they can see if eye movement?
I don't know in this particular case, but...
Well, if they're able to look around the screen, they got some kind of eye movement.
I would think so, yeah. So,
but even still, okay. So this is kind of like the preliminary stuff to the Neuralink.
Neuralink, yeah. Is the brain is plastic in such a way that it can...
it can learn new behaviors, learn a new system, basically.
Right, and this is where like cybernetics and stuff comes in. Because like, it's like essentially theorized that like, let's say we could like figure out whatever biology allows a bat to have sonar, right?
I want that. That'd be sick.
And you could take that biology and turn it into technology as a hat that you wear and then wire that into the brain.
Or goggles you wear that are shaped like a bat.
Right.
And you fly around Gotham.
Yeah. The brain, with its plasticity, would learn to talk back and forth to it and to receive those signals. And in theory, you could essentially like give people more and more senses, more and more ability to detect the world around them. Ooh. They've done like, I think there's some of the ear implants that like have restored hearing to deaf people,
right,
have done the similar thing where they essentially like wire a microphone into the brain.
So it's like a hearing aid, but it's inside your body.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, the microphone is on the outside, but it would wire.
But it goes in.
Yeah, and
like
then
behind the ear
will wire into it. I don't know if they've done the same thing with vision too, but I think I've heard of
we're getting
that
there.
being
I'm
done.
sure that's coming.
So like
it's
interesting
be cool.
because like the brain is wired where it like receives these signals from the ears, from the eyes, whatever.
Yeah.
And I guess the process of growing up, like you see as a parent, like they're like learning how to integrate and
technology so much quicker.
Tell the difference between all of the minutia of the signals they're receiving so that they can perceive more accurately.
Yeah, I was gonna say in nowadays, like it's apparent that kids who are growing up now with this technology all around them are just so much quicker at picking it up.
And there's also been studies done with like people who play sports or like if you like use a tool, like say a golf club or a piece of equipment that becomes like a sort of extension of yourself, then there's like brain structures that build up similar to the brain structures that build up of your own body movement.
Yeah, you do enough repetitions.
Right. So like it's like the brain creates models of these things that it can interact with.
Right.
And sort of incorporates them into itself.
And remembers them, and like that's what muscle memory is basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that? I mean, that's meant to be like it's the muscle, but the muscles are controlled by the brain, so it's really the brain creating the model of the swing or the the slap or whatever it might be, whatever movement it is, even because like boxers and like football players or quarterbacks who throw or anybody who does a motion so repetitively. Like your body builds in that memory, and it's like you don't try anymore. You're not thinking about that anymore because it's such a.
Which is that brings up an interesting topic is like, because that's the difference between like conscious and subconscious brain, right?
Yeah, like you can turn things that were once conscious to a subconscious thing with repetition.
Mm-hmm. So it's like the conscious is like the way where like you're showing your subconscious how to do it.
Yeah.
Like the first time you ride a bike and you have to do everything purposefully on purpose, and it's hard to juggle all the things until you learn how to do it. And then your brain's like, okay, you've done it enough that like I think I got this figured out. And then eventually it does it without you having to think about it. And that's when the subconscious takes over. Which is interesting because, like, if you're talking about consciousness versus subconsciousness, so like,
what's the what marries those two together?
Well, it's interesting because, like,
other than the physical brain,
I think the distinction between the two is like the subconscious seems to be way more powerful.
Yeah.
Way more, faster anyway. It can do things,
it can process things,
you can do highly complicated tasks quickly and effectively.
Yeah.
Without
the need of the consciousness to do any kind of heavy lifting.
But if you've ever like driven home somewhere
and you realize
on your like routine route or whatever, and like your brain is like stuck in this or that, and you like miss an exit, like you realize like for the last 10 minutes it's been your subconscious driving the car, not your conscious brain.
Yeah, I was just
so
gonna
it's
say
been doing
like
its job of like
awake.
Keeping you on the road, keeping you safe,
using the visual cues like the lines and the thing, because those are the things that your conscious brain said, remember this is what's going to save us. You got to do this, you got to do that, you got to make sure you're not going this speed, so check that. So your eyes are constantly scanning and you're just looking around doing all the things that you've always done since you've been driving.
Right.
And your consciousness just fades away.
Your consciousness is on something else. It's on a podcast or it's on a conversation you're having. Right. Your conscious brain is there in that task.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, your subconscious is doing all the other stuff
while also making sure your body is, like
breathing.
Yeah, I don't know if the subconscious. That's kind of the autonomic nervous system. I think that's the nervous system. least the breathing and the...
Well, I think the entire nervous system technically could be classified as part of the brain because it's all neurons all the way down.
But still, it's
different types and whatnot.
It's like a subconscious that's like already been wired. It's been doing this for however old you are, or even 9 months. Add plus 9,
Yeah.
9 months.
But there's still some sort of processing going on there because your body, if you get cold, will speed up your heart rate to warm you up. Like there's some sort of like balance and calculation happening there. Where it's being ran by something, but it sure as heck ain't your conscious brain.
So would you say that the subconscious is the more... Because the subconscious doesn't do any, like, thought. Like, at least you don't know. Is the consciousness and the subconscious the same thing, or are they different things?
Well, they're definitely different things because the conscious has the ability to stop and deliberate and choose. Whereas the subconscious seems to act out on pattern.
To bring this back a bit, the subconscious sounds a lot like an amalgamation of individual consciousness is making sure that you survive, and the consciousness sounds a lot like a soul that's just trying to think, and it's absorbing information from the atmosphere or from the universe, and it's giving all that information to the sensory, all the senses are taking in all that information, and the subconscious still sorts through a lot of that, right?
It sure sounds like that's a plausible explanation for it.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting way to think about it.
I was just like absorbing a bunch of like videos and different articles and stuff about it. And what's his name? I got it written down here. Christoph Koch, or I don't want to say it the other way, but I think it's pronounced Coke. And
we'll say Coke.
Francis Crick. He's the guy who was partially responsible for discovering DNA.
Yeah, that's right.
Before Francis Crick died, he was really into like figuring out the brain, and he was into like neuroscience and stuff. Anyway, so him and Christoph Koch were speculating about like what regions of the brain are like possible candidates. Like if the theory, because like so you have like different camps, right?
Yeah.
So you got like the materialist camp who refuses to embrace like a dualistic thinking. They want everything to be explainable by materialist, naturalist phenomena, right? That's all reducible to science, right?
Yeah.
And so if you subscribe to that worldview, then consciousness is some sort of magic trick created by the brain. And so some structure, some sort of brain chemistry, some part of the brain is going to be what's responsible for creating this experience we call consciousness, if that theory is correct.
Right. So they boil it down to a physical thing happening within the brain.
Yeah. And
a physical chemistry.
Based on like different brain scans and fMRIs and all this, that they speculated it on this part of the brain called the colostrum, which is like connected to all of your senses and to your motor functions. It's connected to like all the important parts of the brain. And they kind of speculated that might be responsible for consciousness, was this thing I was just reading. And
this is Francis Crick?
Yeah. And Christoph Koch. Anyway, they couldn't, like, you can't do any experiments on that on humans, obviously, because that's super unethical. But there was a woman who was suffering from epilepsy, and she was in for like a brain surgery.
They did some experiments on her?
Well, no, it just happened on accident, but the surgeon accidentally electrically stimulated.
How do you accidentally do that? Come on now.
I mean, this is a complicated thing.
What year was this?
I don't know.
Okay, well, if it wasn't in the last 20 years, it probably was done at a time where they were just like, damn, let's just shock it a little bit.
I think it is more recent.
Okay.
Anyway, so he accidentally stimulates the colostrum. And this is a type of brain surgery. Like, in fact, a lot of brain surgery is actually done with the patient being awake because it's actually dangerous for them to be unconscious in certain scenarios.
Really? Like, they almost need the electrical, like, signals being, or... Yeah. I guess either way you have electrical signals unless your brain dead.
Right. So anyway, so he had stimulated a part and it accidentally stimulated the colostrum and she lost consciousness. And then when they stopped stimulating that, it brought it right back.
Okay. So they thought the colostrum was the one.
Yeah. But then I just found another article and it seems to indicate that maybe what it's actually in charge of is like, it's sort of the part that can like control like what of those brain sections of all your senses, of your motor functions, like which section to dedicate awareness to, or might have the ability to like purposely ignore an area to like prevent distraction. That it seems to be, if it's not consciousness, it could be like something that's right underneath consciousness.
Some kind of control mechanism.
That is like the control mechanism for, yeah.
Interesting. You know that.
So there could be like a physical theory, like building up, getting stronger these days for a purely physical explanation of consciousness.
Right.
But even then, the really hard question is, why does it exist in the first place?
Yeah.
Because if we're just biological machines, then
something made it to be that way,
and our brain is like a learning network, then why do you need this subjective experience? Couldn't that network just make guesses based off of all the information it's learned? Yeah, like why does it have to come with an experience of being a being being inside their body, looking out, seeming to control the decisions and the shit,
but it's really just by chemistry.
Yeah, like the theory is essentially
like,
that
why
consciousness
do we have to
is
experience
like
this if it's just chemistry,
neuroscientific illusion? Like it's not actually real.
Right. Yeah. That I don't know that I like that.
I don't. It seems very unsatisfying to me, and it seems to me like people trying to really wanting a certain explanation,
right?
Because you're so sold on like materialism, like you're unwilling to, like, you need your explanation to have a materialist answer.
Yeah, that seems like it's not very well thought out as far as like intuitively. Like,
I mean, it could be true, like,
yeah, I guess,
but
it's not no fun.
it is. It's like in the book last week. It's like it's a very unsatisfying answer to that why question of why consciousness. Right.
Well, and the fact that we can ask that question makes it seem like I don't think we would. I don't know.
But
I mean, the fact that we can, like, if it was just chemistry and it was just all physical, like, and this is all just an illusion, what makes it feel so real? Like, why is it tangible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer, but
so
we can,
I just literally just poked a huge hole in their theory. So get some, suck it. No.
What are you gonna do with that, materialists?
All right, we can take a break.
All right, we'll be back soon, guys. What were you gonna say? We almost started a whole another conversation before hitting record.
I hope I remember everything. I probably already forgot some of it, but we were talking about ChatGPT, right? And we were talking about
how you can use ChatGPT to write prompts for images.
Yeah, and then we were just kind of riffing, and then I was just gonna say, like, once AI becomes conscious, or I guess whatever the form of consciousness, I guess. Well, that was what was gonna lead me into is like it. If we think that AI can become conscious, that's almost a materialist view. It is a materialist view, right? Because because you're saying that consciousness is derived from chemical or
from processes,
right?
That can be understood and then remapped and
replicated,
and imagined into different mediums.
Yeah, that was really all my thought was, but
it was like
leads us back into it.
It was like as a test. Like, if it is true that, so that makes sense. Like, if the materialist reductionist view of consciousness is true, then it would be possible for
us to
an AI to become conscious.
Yeah. That's a materialist view. Is that ultimately...
Is that once you have the right processes mapped out and integrated into the code, that it would be conscious. Right.
Well, and it's also like a way of like, we are smart. Like it's ultimately thinking that eventually we are going to be able to create the thing that we are in the sense of like the thing that we believe to be our consciousness, what it is, at least what the materialist view believes to be consciousness, is creatable, and that we will eventually do that. And that's why there's all this, talk about, AGI.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And that's interesting because, like, the thing is you can actually have AGI. You can have, like, a super intelligence without it necessarily being conscious. It doesn't necessarily have to have an internal experience of what it is like to be it.
Right.
In order to be super intelligent, to be
smart
and dangerous.
Enough to be dangerous. Yeah, to be smart enough to be dangerous. So whether it's conscious or not is still up for debate.
Yeah.
But whether it's smart enough to, do physical things in the physical world that we live in to make things hard for, bad for us is possible.
Yeah. Oh, I need to.
And that still begs to the, the idea that consciousness is fully contained within this physical body, like this physical universe that we live in. Yeah. Like if you think, it brings me to, because I've been reading Rick Strassman's book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy. I think it's a more recent book.
Yeah, that's the one he did after
DMT,
the spirit molecule, and it's sort of his attempt to reconcile the experiences people were having. Yeah. With like historical religions and their records of like visionary experiences.
Philosophies. Yeah, and what he talks about is like when you do psychedelics and DMT, obviously, like the users record or remember it being so like a geometrical, like a fractal geometrical, patterns
that
and
they experience and see.
Yeah, and that makes me think about like what you might be seeing, right, when you're in those kind of states. People talk about that all the time with all the different types of psychedelics too. It's not just DMT. Like people see, maybe DMT peels the layers back the farthest. If you think about like, not to reference Shrek, but it being like an onion, like layers of experience, right? And like we are at this layer where our experience is this physical thing. Like we are experiencing things almost to in the largest macro sense that we can really understand, because once you get outside of our solar system, it starts to get really hard to understand what's going on. And obviously there are scientists that do, but so like I would get back to like the DMT, like, and what you might be seeing in when you're experiencing these psychedelic trips and these geometrical fractal patterns and all this kind of stuff is like almost seems to me like, and I don't want to say it's like a simulation, like to get to the simulation theory, but almost like a sense of that, like you're peeling back the onion so far that you're getting to this base layer, or at least more of a base layer than we've ever experienced, where you are actually seeing the math, the geometry that makes up the, like, almost like if you were to think about like maybe this could be like a dark matter or something that's like so esoteric to our materialist world.
Yeah, something we don't pick up with our normal scientific sensors.
Yeah, something that's so abstract to our reality that it is the underlying reality that makes it up, but it's not what our senses are normally capable of picking up. Mm-hmm. And you need, and it doesn't have to be psychedelics. Like there are, like we've talked about it before, like there are other methods to get to that point. But I do think that DMT, because it is also an endogenous chemical in all of living, well, I don't know if it's all, but I know that there's a ton of plant life that has DMT. We produce DMT in our physical bodies.
I think it's every living thing.
Yeah.
That's what I've heard. I don't know if
that's
true.
What I've heard too, but I don't know if it's true. Yeah. But like, this is a molecule or whatever that is being, that is in every living thing. So there's a connection now between us and every living thing. And when you take this DMT in, I've never done it, maybe I will one day. But I've never done it, and I've only gone, just listened to people. And the way they describe it, it just makes me think like this is like maybe not base reality, maybe not the thought. Like it's not, you're not, maybe seeing the mind of whatever the creationary thought might have been, or whatever it was. Maybe it wasn't a thought, maybe it was something else. But like it makes me think of like that it is a, we are just seeing what we need to see to survive, but we are still a part of what it is, like we are still made up of what
you're describing is like, that's essentially Donald Hoffman's argument.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and he's a panpsychist too. Yeah.
So his idea is that, and he claims, I don't know all the math well enough, but his claim is that people who do know the math of gravity, of relativity, and of quantum physics know now, or like are seeing the writing on the wall, that space-time is not fundamental.
Right.
Okay, that there is, that once you go down super small enough, you essentially penetrate beyond the Planck length.
Yep.
You penetrate beyond what it means for space and time to even be a thing.
Yeah.
And that there is some sort of something underlying that.
Yeah.
And that whatever it is that's underlying that is manifesting as quantum physics and as relativity.
And maybe that's a process though too, like we don't know that that's not a process, a physical process happening in some kind of alternate dimension or some kind of catalyst dimension.
He gives the analogy,
gives birth to universes.
Yeah, he gives the analogy of an operating system, right? So like you with your phone.
Yeah.
You click, you unlock it, and you're looking at a screen with some icons, and you can tap on an icon and it opens a program, and then you can do something on the program, call an Uber, and get a ride somewhere, right? But like, none of that is real. What's actually happening is that there's a bunch of little tiny transistors in there making logic gates, shuffling ones and zeros around, and the actual underlying truth is that. Yeah, but us as humans, if we had to manipulate the ones and zeros to call an Uber, forget it. Like, we couldn't do that.
We wouldn't do that. Yeah.
We wouldn't. We wouldn't. And if we wanted to, we couldn't, because it's too complicated, right? And so what do? We create a user interface, and it builds up in layers, to your point, right? Like, so at the very base level, you have the ones and zeros.
Right.
And then above that, you have machine code.
Right.
And then above that, you have programming languages that are meant for humans to write code.
That's where we interject things.
Right. And then the operating systems that run on the phone are written in those programming languages, which then give rise to easier programming languages that app creators use to write their apps in.
Right.
And they'll assign icons and
user
give
interfaces.
this spatial, and it's all a metaphor for you as the human to manipulate to those ones and zeros, which is what you're actually doing. But in actual truth, you like calling an Uber is a very complicated amount of ones and zeros flipping states that you couldn't do if you had to deal with reality on that base ones and zeros level. And in a similar way, when we open our eyes and we look out, I look at this wall and I see the color white, but what is white? It's all the different wavelengths coming into my eye in the same spot at the same time.
Right.
But instead of seeing red and green and blue, my brain processes that and delivers it to my consciousness as white.
It's eggshell, by the way.
But there isn't a white. Like, white doesn't actually exist. All that actually exists is wavelengths, individual wavelengths of light.
Right. Man.
And basically that's what Donald Hoffman is saying is the case for physics itself, is that space-time, gravity, relativity, quantum mechanics, those are an operating system themselves.
Are they the operating system?
They are based on something more fundamental.
So you're saying even like the point where, the code could be interjected is still further removed from where we're at?
Further removed from the quantum physics, further removed from the relativity.
And
that's where he proposes that it's actually consciousness that's fundamental.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, I don't remember where I had it stored. That other guy I recommended to you, I don't know if you've listened to him yet. Let me see if I can find it real quick.
Yeah. I find that to be an interesting idea. Like, he's the most mathematically versed person I've heard talk about consciousness being fundamental. Before that, I've heard people theorize about it and whatnot who didn't necessarily have those sorts of hardcore scientific credentials, but someone like him, it comes off a lot more credible.
So it was Stephen C. Meyer. That was the guy I recommended to you. He was on Joe Rogan. He's a philosopher of science, the director of the Center of Science and Culture at the Discovery Institute, and the author of several books, including Darwin's Doubt, The Explosive Origin of Animal Life, and The Case for Intelligent Design. So he is actually religious. And he also wrote The Return of the God Hypothesis.
Right.
So he's a religious scientist, and he talks about how and he's the guy that we had talked about. He talks about how evolution is not realistic once you start, getting down to the base level of it. Once you get down to, where we came from, right? The amoeba originally,
Yeah.
We talked about this too.
I did listen to the podcast. And
you did? Okay.
Yeah. If I understand his position is that adaptation and microevolution he has no problem with. But speciation events is what he has a problem with. But
it doesn't necessarily fully have to do with what we're talking about here, but it's similar in that it talks about...
Well, it's similar in that he's trying to use the tools of science to show or at least provide room for the existence of God.
Right.
Right. And, you know, you could accuse them of being biased in going about doing that, but
sure,
you could just as well accuse any scientist of being biased for going
fully
at
against it
with the preconceived notion of a materialist worldview.
Yeah, without any, you know, consideration to spirituality or...
Because it's not fair to say I'm not biased because I'm going into science without religion when you're going into science
without religion, like, or without the open mind,
with a particular philosophy on what you're willing to accept as a possibility for how the world.
You have a particularly closed mind,
right? So if you're unwilling to entertain that science could take us in the religious direction, then that's a bias as well.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that everything he says is fact, and I don't know that he fully thinks, because a lot of it's philosophy. You know, it's just a lot of people coming around and, you know, they use science, but it's the philosophy of science is a lot of it. You know, it's like the thought of, you know, what all this means that we're discovering. So,
yeah.
Another thing I wanted to just interject. Maybe, I'll interject. Just something that maybe we could riff off. So Plato, he saw consciousness as a part of an ideal world. He thought that person's consciousnesses creates mental images of concepts and ideas that are only imperfect once an individual tries to manifest those mental images in the real world. So the thought is the more perfect, like, thought
like
and creation.
Platonic, like, it hands down in, like, Platonic ideas. Like, we'll call it like so like the idea of a perfect circle. It can exist in a concept, it can exist in a thought form, but it can't exist in physicality in the real world and matter, which is interesting. So in some ways, like, you could argue that thought form is real and more real than the circle in reality.
Yeah.
Because it's more true to the definition.
Yeah.
And it's prior, because if you use that thought form to understand the circle in the first place or to create the circle, then it's that thought form that was there before the circle was there.
Well, and we didn't actually cover it, but in the first chapter of the chapter 1 of The Secret History of the World, they do a thought experiment where they ask you to close your eyes and imagine a table and imagine the lacquer used and the type of wood and the color and all these things. And they ask you to imagine this elaborate table and, like, what it looks like to you and, like, how it feels, how it smells, all these things. And then what's the finish look like? Is it shiny? Is it matte? Is it any of these things? And then look down at the table in front of you or near you. What can you be sure of as being more real is what they ask.
Right.
Can your imagination and your mind create something that is so much more vivid and real and perfect in in what you idealize as the thing? But once it's created, you cannot. It's very hard. Like, and we see it in every day too. Like, you have an idea of what your day is going to look like. Right? Like, you wake up and you have an idea. You have things on your to-do list, and you have this and that to do, but it's never plays out the way you imagine your day playing out, ever.
Right.
It's like that whole idea of like, are you, like, in dreams too, like all these different imaginative things that your brain does, and your consciousness is a part of that, right? Like, even if you're asleep, like, do we know that our consciousness is not still alive or there during that time?
I want to bring that back to Rick Strassman's work because in this scientific study of DMT and the hundreds of people that he had take big doses of it.
Intravenously too.
Their experience for a lot of them when they come back, the language they use is that it's more real than real. Like, they are so confident and sure of what they experienced being real because their consciousness experienced it in a way that told them that it was more real. Like, there was information there that they got that when you come back, you don't get.
Yeah, and their brain, like the receiver, the antenna, in my mind, that I'm creating this whole image of consciousness, like me personally. Like things that your brain tells you is real are the real things, right? Like, we know that. Like, the truths that you live your life by are ultimately dictated by whether you believe they're true or not.
I mean, to a certain extent, like, if you tell yourself the street in front of your house is a hopscotch game and that's real to you, and you go and proceed to play hopscotch on it and ignore the fact that it's a street, like, you can still get hit by a bus, and the quote unquote real world will disagree with your aspect of reality.
And it may be. How do we know that we're not forming some kind of wormhole, right? Like, your game of hopscotch in one reality that ends in tragedy just hopscotches you into a new reality, and now your consciousness is thriving there. We don't know.
Sure, but how could you ever know that?
No, I know, but I'm just like to play the imaginative exercise. Like, it's fun to like obviously, like, people who are, quote unquote schizophrenic and like have like episodes where they see things and they hear things and they're experiencing these things. Like, who are we to tell them that that's not real?
Right. I mean,
like, who are we to tell
them it is, because it's their experience.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's all subjective in the sense of, like, you're experiencing those things. Yes, the people around you may not be experiencing those things, but does it matter? Because your reality is dictated by what you believe is real. So whether you die getting hit by a bus trying to play hopscotch because you think the world is a hopscotch game across the street, like, it's still real. And we still don't know whether this consciousness is something that follows us forever and we're on this never-ending path of discovery and learning. And, like, does it really matter if things never truly end, in a sense of, like, energy never dies, it just transforms?
Yeah, I just think a lot of people
and that also
necessarily like so yes, you could say that for that person playing hopscotch on the street. Like, it was real for them up until the moment they died, and so they died in a state of believing it's real. But I don't think very many of us are interested in creating your own reality, if that's what we mean by it. If creating your own reality can put you at odds with
obviously
what you
that's
need
not the
in order
intent.
to survive and thrive in life.
Right. No, I get that. Yeah. So, like, if you're completely out of touch, like, it's definitely not a good thing if you want to survive and thrive, obviously. And I'm not, saying that it's a good thing, but I'm just saying that it's not real.
Yeah, well, and that goes to what is real. Yeah, what does real mean? And that goes back to I think, therefore I am, we can only know anything based off the fact that we have an experience in the first place.
So that leads me into, I wanted to read a bit of this about solipsism.
Okay.
So the definition of solipsism, from Latin solus, meaning alone, and ips, meaning self, is the philosophical idea that only one's mind is sure to exist. So solipsism is a philosophical position that asserts that the idea that only one's mind is certain to exist, and that anything outside of one's mind, including the external world and other minds, cannot be known with certainty or may not exist at all. In other words, solipsism suggests that only one thing can be sure of, that the only thing that can be sure of is the existence of one's own thoughts and consciousness.
Right.
So there are different forms and degrees of solipsism, ranging from radical or extreme solipsism, which denies the existence of anything beyond one's own mind, to more moderate forms that acknowledge existence of external world, but emphasize that limits of knowledge about it, it emphasizes the limits of the knowledge about it. So
I don't
no matter
see how
what,
you can argue that lesser form of it. Like, obviously, the extreme one
you can probably argue, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
even
the
if it's
moderate
true, it's useless because we all act as though stuff outside of our mind is real, and that
like you can't go about thinking that you right now talking to me is me actually talking to me. Like, I can't justify that, and I can't make sense of that, and I can't interact with that.
Right.
So the moderate form definitely is hard. Like, it's hard to.
I'd be interested in knowing some arguments to it, because I don't see a valid argument against that. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, it goes on. I got a few points here on it. While solipsism is an interesting and provocative philosophical concept, it is generally considered an extreme and unconventional position. Most people operate on the assumption that an external world and other minds exist, and they use reason and empirical evidence to understand and navigate reality. It is important.
Not an argument.
No, it's not. It's not really an argument, but it is important to note that solipsism is often discussed within the context of epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that deals with the nature, scope, and limits of human knowledge. Philosophers throughout history have explored solipsism as a thought experiment and a way to examine the foundation of knowledge and reality.
Right.
So they're using this specific philosophy to help them with other thoughts, like, you know, to like help them discover more and to like understand like the real foundation of it all, you know. So it's not, you know, this idea is not something that I play with in the sense of like, you know, thinking it's real. But
that's essentially what I've been describing, though. Like, you can only know that your own brain and everything going on inside it, you can only know for 100% certain, undoubtable, no question, no evidence to overturn that you exist. Yeah. Right? Everything else is subject to misperception, misunderstanding, just incomplete information. You know, like when we look out, we don't see ultraviolet rays, but we can see the sunburn and feel the sunburn that happens later.
And we have tools now to discover it, to actually see them now.
Right. And so like we learn through experience, through the feelings, through the consciousness, like how to behave in the real world. And, you know, and like when it ends up in situations that your brain chemistry rewards you for, you're like, okay, I'll do more of that. And when it ends you up in situations that end in pain and suffering, your brain is like, please avoid those things. And you develop fears and phobias. And so you learn to go towards some things and away from other things. And it's interesting because...
But it is, it definitely, like, even that, like what you just said there, like, you know, we have control within it. It's about the perception, right? Mm-hmm. It's about what you've been programmed with, right? It's about all the information that your brain has taken in over the years that you've been around. So, like, it really does, like, your experience is really dictated by, you know, obviously your brain and what and whether it's healthy and it's being receiving the signals correctly and all these things, but also like your experience is your experience, like, yeah. Because there's, you know, like there's perfectly healthy people that have gone long times in their life, you know, living, you know, just like we all do. And then, you know, we have, and they snap or whatever, you know, and they have this experience and it's now their whole world has changed. Mm-hmm.
in a way that makes their survival less likely, right? Which
in extreme conditions, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what if those sort of pathways, those sort of hallucinations that someone can get stuck in if they're schizophrenic can be harnessed in ways that actually are adaptive, that are promoting of survival.
Well, and that's where we go back to Rick Strassman a little bit too, and like his work with DMT and a lot of other
shamanism
people.
And stuff.
Shamanism.
Too.
Whoa, did we put an effect on here?
It was just there from the previous file, but the listeners won't hear it.
That was fun.
Anyway,
but yeah, like
let's take another quick break, and let's come back and
all right.
talk more about this. This is one of my favorite topics, man.
Yeah, and honestly,
but I want to go.
I don't want to leave it all out there either, too, because I think we're going to continue to have this conversation.
There's a few points I want to hit on, but I think we're naturally leading into like hallucinogenics and shamanism and those type of experiences.
Perfect, because I got nothing else, so I'm going to be all ears. Cool. All right, we'll be right back. So we have this habit of having good conversations on our breaks.
Well, we kind of inspired one. It was on a slightly different topic, but it came back to consciousness. So
it did naturally.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were. Do you remember what thought thread you were on there?
Yeah. So in some of the stuff I was like looking into in prep for the show, like different people were saying like. One of the problems for scientists with consciousness is not just explaining it, where it comes from, but it's also explaining why it's there. Because if it's there and they believe in evolution, they believe in, adaptive changes, the fact that consciousness exists most likely exists for an evolutionary purpose, right? And so they need to understand what that purpose is as part of their endeavor into figuring out what is consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we were talking about how different people's points of views, different people's way of seeing the world, it is real for them. Like that's how they go through life. That's how they experience it. Like, whatever tools you use for interpreting events, whatever things you focus on when you open your smartphone or when you take in news or when you choose to listen to a podcast or read a book or whatever people you put into your life, whatever music you listen to, whatever attitudes and habits, like you do in a very real way, consciously create and control your life.
Yeah. Steer it.
And we're in this weird age with the internet where we have access to all this information. We have all this ability to create like online communities that like are all around the world.
Right.
Like, is it possible you fast forward this like a few 100,000 years,
even 150 years.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how long. Yeah. But however long it takes. Years. But if you fast forward long enough,
right,
will humans kind of subdivide into different groups? Will we essentially like speciate from each other again?
Right.
And that's an interesting idea.
Well, if you're Stephen C. Meyer, you don't think that's possible.
Yeah. But I was thinking
speciation, like, at least.
What if a possible explanation for like the why, the evolutionary why for why consciousness is that creating consciousness has the effect of the being able to like direct its life and change its life in the same way that we were just saying, like your outlook, everything, like you do consciously create your life.
Right.
So in the same way, if you evolutionarily create that, and then that being goes and makes a bunch of choices in its life that changes its state, and then it will be more successful at having kids. It will be more successful at steering those kids into raising them in a certain way to continue that conscious path they're on.
Yeah.
So like, what do I mean? Like, so like, for example, let's say you're a first generation, like career athlete in your family. So like, if you spend your entire life eating well and working out and exercising and becoming extremely proficient, you know, world-class level NBA player athlete.
Yeah.
Like that will affect your choices for marrying.
Right.
That will
dictate how you parent.
When you ultimately have kids later on,
yeah,
and then that kid grows up into this athlete, no one is surprised.
Right.
And they may even tell that kid that they got the genetic lottery.
Right.
Right. And maybe to some extent that's true. But remember, that parent was a first generation athlete.
Right. It started somewhere else.
So they made the conscious decision to pursue a life path in a certain direction that had effects on their next generation.
Yep.
To where other people, when they see that person, they're like, oh, your dad's an NBA star? Of course you are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, what if consciousness's role is to sort of, in a way, direct evolution by making conscious choices.
I see.
And then that affecting the offspring. And what if evolution can actually happen a bit quicker because of those conscious choices?
Interesting.
And that is sort of a middle ground between like the creationists who say like this is intelligent design.
Whoa.
In a way, it is intelligent design because it's consciousness directed evolution.
Right. Man, if you throw in panpsychism into that too, if consciousness is their prime directive is to bring about evolution, then I mean that gives you the beginnings of a multiverse. I don't know about multiverse, but multiple.
Yeah,
I mean, if
it
you're
could
thinking,
be like,
well, if you're thinking on the really like.
So
not even quantum, like
panpsychism is
level.
real, like if consciousness is the fundamental unit.
Yeah.
Okay, let's suppose that's the truth, okay? So let's like iron out like what would be some things we would expect to fall out of that. If everything has a consciousness, and let's say in addition to panpsychism being true, that whatever that essence of your consciousness, your soul, whatever,
right,
has some sort of existence outside the physical body.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't necessarily terminate upon the end of a life.
Right.
Then you would expect everything that had a consciousness to have something sort of afterlife in a way as well.
Also have a soul or something.
Yeah.
Or something it's derived from or has some kind
and
of...
whatever interaction between those things in their sort of quote unquote spirit realm, their creations, like this could all be the type of stuff that people are seeing when they go on these DMT journeys.
Yeah.
When they do change consciousness into whatever and they have these crazy experiences,
right,
they're seeing the dreams of everything else and interacting with the dreams of everything else, and everything else can create reality in that more than like think about our realm, our waking life it seems to be different than the dreaming. Like there are rules of physics, there are laws, there are something that makes distinct this realm from that one.
Yeah. There also does seem to be some sort of collective consciousness, though, like in the sense of like all of our, like there's a lot of cases of like people having the same ideas across, you know, the earth at the same time, and you know, having
the whole
created
thing about like an idea whose time has come.
Dude, yeah, and that like ideas almost are like the life, like the food or the sustenance of the consciousness. Like there are possibilities essentially, and it is the directive
like
of
meme theory, but like a spiritual version of meme theory.
Yeah, like it's yeah,
like Richard Dawkins' idea that like memes are like infectious.
Oh yeah. Okay, I thought you
have a sort of life and existence of their own.
Yeah.
That would be like a weird spiritual counterpart for that.
Yeah, so that's basically I just mean like there are like the duality of existence, right? So there's consciousness and there's this soul. But what's what is the thing that it is rubbing against to make it a thing, right?
To make the physical part of it?
Or so like it's the idea, like you go back to like the idea of the mother goddess and Saturn, and like this idea of yin and yang, and you know, this whole like this duality of everything. Like that is sort of, what if that is sort of like intrinsic to this whole beginning or thought or consciousness? Like if there is consciousness, there is the anti-consciousness, right? Or the subconscious, if you will. Like,
oh, interesting.
Like if you think of the subconscious being the anti of it, and they have to exist together. So if consciousness is this, you know, force, there's something it has to push against for it to be a force, right? And that could be this whole dark matter thing too. We have matter, and that is what makes up this material world, but there is dark matter that we are discovering, or not discovering, basically. Like we know there is this mass in the universe that we can't see and detect.
Like, materialists would hate the thought, but like if dark matter is real as like a thing in the world, and not some weird other fluke of the theories.
Yeah.
What if like that sort of entire spiritual realm is that dark matter?
Yeah. And we also, like, being what we are, right? So we are still further, like we are further down the road from whatever that is, right? So that's the initiate, that's the beginning, right? The beginning and the constant of this universe, and we are still further down. Like we are matter that has coagulated and come up with its own thoughts and has its own things, and then it coagulates further. You know, we're almost further derived from the original thing, and that's where this layers of onion come in to play, where there's layers to this thing, and this chemical DMT that's endogenous in living things is almost like it's like the back door of the software.
Yeah.
That you can always come back to, right? It's like this thing that that they even think now that when you're born and when you are on near death experiences and when you actually die, like this is what's happening. The DMT inside your body is being released as a chemical into your brain so that you can interface with what it is to be the essence of you.
Yeah.
Derived all the way back. And that there's this connection that you and all of these different layers of the onion have. And that's the spirit. The spirit travels in the spirit realm that connects all of them. And the consciousnesses are just layer, like your specific consciousness that you're experiencing now is just a layer of the onion that once it gets peeled back, you go back further. The DMT helps you through that journey. This chemical that is endogenous in our brains or in our bodies.
Yeah.
In every living thing. Like, that's a trippy rabbit hole to go
Hoffman,
down.
in his book, he says like that there's his way of doing it, which is essentially you just have to grant him that consciousness exists.
The one miracle.
The one miracle.
Yeah.
And then his task is to try and build up from that. And he has the equally hard issue of trying to bridge matter from consciousness, which is the same but opposite problem that materialists have of trying to use all this matter and explain consciousness. So you have the opposite problem, but he says that you can build up networks of consciousnesses, different types of consciousnesses. Like, as long as you grant consciousness, like, you can build a math and a science based off that assumption.
Right.
It's still super theoretical at this point, and not like
obviously
tested, but
yeah. I mean, how would you go about?
I mean, once you develop it enough, if it's a good theory, it should have predictions, and predictions you should be able to find some way to experiment.
You'd think.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah, that's such a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. It's
Yeah.
just, even in your own mind, without having to go on the computer, like, you can really go down some, all you got to do is just suspend disbelief a little bit.
The other thing about consciousness is there's different types and different levels, right? So, like, in our waking state, we're in typically beta wave, which is 12 to 30 hertz. I'll put this image up.
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking at
if we're in heavy thought, like trying to figure out, like chewing on a problem, something like that, we're going to be in like the gamma territory.
That's 30 to 100 hertz.
Yeah.
That's what it's showing. Super high frequency.
But I don't think necessarily everyone can get there either.
If you're just listening, it says gamma waves, and it's 30 to 100 hertz, and it's insight, peak experiences, and synchronization.
Yeah.
That's what they have there.
And then beta, that's like normal waking state, alertness, concentration, thinking, 12 to 30 hertz.
Alertness, concentration, thinking, yeah. Okay.
Then below that, you have alpha waves. That's like meditation, creativity, relaxation. This is like, yeah.
8 to 12 hertz.
It's not quite asleep.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like that feeling you get right before when you're just like super calm and everything's kind of winding down, and you know that, like, okay, everything's good right now. I'm just gonna relax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you have theta, 4 to 8 hertz, visualization, trance, dreaming.
Yeah. Yeah, because
so
you don't.
When you're
you don't,
dreaming.
Yeah, that's an active. Here. It's still an active part of. It's like your brain is super active at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're getting 4 to 8 hertz frequencies, and much slower, obviously, than waking.
And then delta below that, which is 0.5 to 4 hertz.
Deep
sleep.
Transcendence and restoration.
So, yeah, when you go into ultra deep sleep, like, your brain super slows down. You can come up from that for dreams. You come up from that, you're awake, relaxed.
Well, and
you come up from that, and that's like you're going throughout your day. And then when you're at peak performance, you're gamma, right? Like, that's interesting because what if you can... These are all different modes of consciousness, and what if it's advantageous to you to take advantage of a certain mode at a certain time? You can, like, learn through meditation or different techniques and mindfulness practices. Like, you can learn how to kind of kick yourself up or down in these.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what shamanism does. So shamanism, I just read this little book, and I'll leave a link to it, and I talked about it in the last episode too, but it's Hank Wesselman,
Journey
to the Sacred Garden.
Yep.
So Hank Wesselman, he's a local professor. He was taught at ARC.
That's right.
Is like religion and witchcraft and spirituality class or whatever. He's an anthropologist.
You're saying it was your friend's mom who like took his classes, like a lifelong student.
And
something.
she and him got me super into his work. So he's got this trilogy book series called the Spirit Walker trilogy, and that's a documenting of him as a field anthropologist being involved in the team that discovered Lucy, to learning, like having connections with some natives and learning about shamanism in a deep way and like how to do it, and to like full-blown shamanic experiences and like premonitions of the future and past, and
so that
all
kind
of his experiences
like
in shamanism.
It's a lot like Rick Strassman in that, like he's not super into the shamanism part, but he's into like Zen Buddhism, and he did it for the same reason. But they kind of kicked him out when he started talking about psychedelics, and then he went to shamanism.
That's right.
He went to I think he went to South American or Indian shamanism or something like that.
For ayahuasca.
It was like Native American shamanism, something like that. Yeah, continue.
So, shamanism like is a word anthropologists will use to like describe the person in a community or tribe who has this ability to like have visions and commune with nature and communicate with the other side.
The spirit world.
Yeah.
That's what they call it because they're non-theistic, right? Or what's the term?
Anthropologists?
No, I'm talking about the shamans themselves. Aren't they like, they believe in the deity of like nature itself and like.
No, it's cultural inspecific. It's a term anthropologists use to label that, right? So like, in any culture, you could be whatever religion, you can have whatever.
So the shaman is just a title.
It's like it's identifying a function in a culture.
I got you.
Right? Like this is the shaman of the culture. He's the medicine man, medicine woman.
I see.
Right?
Okay. You can call anybody that's have that similar title.
But anthropologists have studied this role in cultures all over the world, and there's a certain number of the like core tenets that regardless of the culture, they all kind of sort of agree on, which is like these methods for going into like trance-like states. And so similar to the Secret History of the World intro, like these people will do things like sleep deprivation, fasting, drumming, taking plant medicines, going into freezing cold, going into caves, like
doing the extremes,
sensory deprivation. Like there's all these different techniques, and they're essentially designed to like get you into that theta state. That change of consciousness level. And if you can do that while you actually are conscious and you're still awake, you're not actually just sleeping, then you can have a conscious control.
Directed. Yeah.
And that essentially the book is his like instruction guide, the Journey Through the Sacred Garden. That's like it's short. It's like 100 pages, half height book on big font, wide spacing, and a bunch of pages have like a full print on them. So it's like really like a 30-page book. It's short.
You need to give me those. Do you have the physical copies of them?
Yeah, I do.
I need to read those.
Well, no, just this one, like the Journey Through the Sacred Garden. So those other books are his whole journey through that. The Journey to the Sacred Garden is his instruction manual on how to do shamanism. So, and he includes like a music CD, and it's essentially drumming designed to sync your brain
with that frequency,
in sync with the lower frequency to get you into that theta state. And it's proven scientifically that humans can do that.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about like the whole cymatics and stuff too. Like this whole idea that like matter resonates on certain frequencies and it creates different patterns. And
music is a big part of it in lots of the cultures.
Yeah. You can get your brain to do different things. And, yeah.
So
that's crazy.
Anyway, like the claim is that you can, if you put yourself in this and you learn and take your time to figure out that mode of consciousness, like his claim, even after spending his life as a scientist, is like, this shit is real.
Yeah.
And so he took it seriously, and he like communes with the spirits, and he
still does it.
He actually moved to Hawaii.
Oh yeah, does he still do stuff? Do you know?
I don't know. Actually, I haven't followed him recently. He would be pretty old right now, but he might still be putting stuff out.
Hopefully, he's not like that cult leader, the Mother Goddess. Did you hear about her?
No, him. It was just him and his wife. Like, his kids.
I'm
He's
just kidding.
super chill.
Did you hear about that cult leader, the Mother Goddess lady? Apparently, she was like a yoga and like meditation like person, and like she, had this philosophy that she was like the reincarnation of every god in known to man, and she was like a channeler and like all these different things, and like she ended up like recently, I guess it was a big news story, and I think I heard about it on Joe Rogan, but or maybe it was just like an Instagram post I saw, but you see like she started drinking silver, like colloidal silver, and like a bunch of stuff because it was like part of this whole like process, I guess, or it was also having to do with like she had health issues, like she was bulimic and alcoholic and like drug addict and all these things, and she built like this massive following of people, and they're like she would like go into these deep trances where she would like channel things, and like she would channel like dead famous people and like like all sorts of wacky stuff. As well, maybe it was real. I don't know. Is this her?
Is it How the Bizarre Cult of Mother God ended with Amy Carlson's mummified corpse?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. So the image I saw was like this like super skinny, like
from
bony
News.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how reliable that is, but it was talked about on Joe Rogan too, and like apparently she like built this cult following that like eventually helped her demise. Like they were like she would have these like experiences and stuff, and they would believe, and then eventually it got to the point where she was coming out of these like trances or whatever, and she was saying like, I think I'm dying, like I need somebody, like I need help, and like she would like their followers would tell her like, oh no, you're just in your lower state, or you're in your lower state of activity, and like this is just your physical mind, your physical being trying to like control the situation, and like you don't really need those things, and like they were like depriving her of food and like all of these different things that she needed to survive. And like she was drinking this colloidal silver, she was getting drunk, and like just like eventually she just died. She was just dead in place, and they were still worshiping her dead skeleton.
Her mummified remains were in a sleeping bag decorated with Christmas lights, glitter sprinkled around her eyes. She'd been tucked into bed in what authorities said looked like a shrine. Whereas a housemate told the deputies when they arrived to search the premises, Mother is in rest.
Dude. Yeah, so like she believed it, and like they believed it, but then they would like she would get drunk and high and like drinking colloidal silver, and like she would trip the F out, and and so when she would come out of it, she'd be like, I need help and these things, and they were like, no, like you're in your lower wave length or whatever they would say to her, and they would just keep her there, and she was so weak and frail, like she couldn't fight them.
And that's the thing with all this stuff is like even if we show that consciousness is fundamental, even if we show that this sort of spiritual realm, there is truth to it, it's super important to like not allow other people to tell you how things are. Yeah. Because you can't be gullible like that. That's how people end up in cults. Yeah. And that's why we use like science and reason, and science can be frustrating, but even in the areas that science can't investigate, we can at least still use like good sense and logic and skepticism to like weed out, truth from, a scam or a lie. Right. So I would say anyone who claims to be one of these people who has visions or whatever, like, you know.
That's obviously a sign right in and of itself.
Well, I mean, maybe you can listen to him. Maybe it's just someone who took DMT and had a vision, you know, or maybe it's someone who just is naturally, their brain can be in this on command.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you need to deify them. You
don't deify people, and you don't just believe everything everyone says blindly. Yeah. You know, I think
you need to do you need to do your own research and discovery and plug it into your life and see how it fits. And if it doesn't fit, throw it away.
Yeah. Right.
Don't be afraid to change the things, you know, like your choices like are not unchangeable. It's, you know, like you can, I mean, there are obviously some things you can't take back, but like just don't be afraid to try new things and open your mind and allow some of this information and other information in, but take it with a grain of salt, do your research, you know, let you be the one who tells you what you believe. Don't let somebody else sneak in. Yeah.
Don't set your reality that the busy street is your hopscotch.
Right.
Because, you know?
Yeah.
There's lots of forms of that you can build in your own life, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of them can be comforting and all these things, but yeah, no, it's definitely important to keep yourself grounded in who and what you are and try to, you know, be open-minded, because it is important to stay open-minded, and
yeah,
I think that's all very useful, but still stay vigilant, because your mind can play tricks on you.
Indeed.
Or because you're, you know, just like the thought, like subconscious, conscious, like there's a duality even within your own self.
And like the shamans and the visionaries and the people who go to those realms and report back the beings there. What's a very common thing for people to report? What's a big stereotype of the gods?
Yeah.
There's always a trickster.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, stay vigilant. Watch out for that duality every time you make a decision.
All right, we'll be back.
Keep doing this British accent every time I come back. I'll stop.
It's terrible, but
hello, governor. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean, like acting.
If you can call it that.
Damn it.
So
yeah, I'll stop.
No, you don't have to.
So yeah, we were talking about that cult. And like just be mindful of tricksters. Right. Right.
So
yeah, we were also talking about Hank Wesselman
and the Journey to the Sacred Garden. And I kind of want to explain that.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Because the book is so short, I can kind of
summarize
not do it perfect justice, but I can kind of summarize it.
Well, let's read it.
For a show?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we? I don't know. Call him. Don't you have his number?
Yeah, my friend might. I can ask her. Okay. But yeah. So the idea is like he's explaining shamanism and how to, like, what is the process, the procedure for doing it.
Okay.
And so the procedure is that you're supposed to, and this is what he said, like from his anthropological training, like you can gather these like core concepts from
all the different shamans,
and different cultures
okay.
in the world. They all have certain commonalities. So this is the one he picked. It's the Hawaiian tradition, which is what spoke to him the most. But he says that you want to make sure you do this at a time of day where you're not prone to fall asleep. So like super late at night isn't good because the deep relaxation could like lead you to just drift off into sleep.
Okay.
But you want to be super comfortable to where like you don't need to make a bunch of adjustments to your posture and stuff to stay comfortable. Somewhere super comfy. And then he walks you through a breathing exercise. Well, no, then you put on a drumming track. Okay.
Okay.
And it's just like there's a drumming and there's a rattle. And he says some people are more, get more results from the rattling than the drumming.
Based on your frequency.
Yeah. But you could probably use whatever music, as long as it's like, the reason he provides a specific one is because it's tuned to like put your body naturally in that like theta rhythm.
I was gonna say, so maybe you find something that can do that if you so choose, or if
I've
you've
even
done
heard of
something
people
like this.
shifting frequencies of music to put it there,
Ooh.
so they can like listen to their favorite
Like start
stuff.
something and then like shifting the music itself to that frequency.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the tempo matters too. So anyway. So you put on the drumming and he walks you through a breathing exercise where you gain energy for yourself, where you do long breaths in at least 4 seconds. And as you do it, you're supposed to like visualize energy coming into you, like through the top of your head.
Okay.
And then on your exhale, you're supposed to visualize that energy like collecting and storing in you. And then you do it over and over.
In your stomach, I'm assuming.
Yeah, in your stomach. Which is like whatever. I don't know all the chakras, but that's base one.
Yeah, it's one of the. It's like the second one. I'm not even gonna try because I'll screw it up. Yeah.
Anyway, so
Amy, help.
You're supposed to visualize. Yeah, right. You're supposed to visualize that, and then once you feel like relaxed and like that, you have whatever energy you need. You're supposed to start. You're supposed to create a safe place for yourself.
Okay.
In your imagination, use your mind's eye and paint all the detail of like a place that will make you feel comfortable and like home and secure. So for him, it's a garden. For some people, maybe it's a beach. Maybe it's your room. Maybe it's a
library,
college dormitory. Maybe it's a library. Maybe it's inside of a video game. Like, it doesn't really matter as long as it's something
that would be sick. Okay.
that you envision and that you feel comfortable and safe in, right?
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to just make that a part of your practice to like be able to get into the state, meditate, go there. And then place things there that make you comfortable or whatever. Maybe it's music, maybe it's a tree, maybe it's a painting, right? And then he says what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to like, he gives you like a prayer, like a protection prayer to do to like essentially try and ward off anyone who would have malintent towards you. And then you're supposed to start putting out a call. And he walks you through like the type of things you can like use to do that. And you're supposed to put out a call to like some sort of entity that is concerned for your well-being. So maybe it's a ancestor, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a old teacher, maybe it's a spirit of an animal, whatever.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily know what it will be. It's not your choice. You're just putting out the intention for someone who has those good intentions for you.
Yeah, just side thing. This reminds me, and maybe we'll link to it, is it just as this, reminds me of Brothers of the Serpent guest, Heather Shy.
Yeah.
And she does Akashic records and ancestral, like the ancestral magic and like all of the different.
And there's a reason why it sounds similar. That's what Hank is saying. Like, this is that shamanism role. And it can be couched in different cultural language. So her version of that in the language and the tradition she has built around it from her practice.
I see.
Every culture will have their own spin on it.
Yeah.
For him, it's the Hawaiian culture for Hank.
Gotcha. So
and that's what he's drawing from for this instruction manual. But you can take this and like do what you need with it that fits your cultural preference, or find a different tradition closer to the one you are interested in and take it from that culture. But anyway, you build your sacred place. Okay. And then you put out a call for like an entity who
to
guide you and protect you. And then he says to like, you have to be open, and like it sometimes comes in a form that like you don't expect. Sometimes it's blatant. Also in the like visualization process of like creating your place, like different people have different types of like experiences of that. Templates. Some people are more like visual and have that photographic experience. Some people it's more auditory. Some people are more like kinetic.
This sounds exactly like what Heather Shai was talking about.
Yeah.
And it's just a different way of like relating it to yourself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so, he says that once you've made connection with whatever entity that is, you can ask it to like take you places or show you things, and it can be your guide. So it can take you into what he calls like the lower realms or like the upper realms. And so the lower realms he classifies as like nature's dreaming. That's like where the great spirits of nature and trees and different animals,
plant life and animal life.
He says, that's where like a lot of that lives.
Lower
and creates,
consciousness or whatever.
Right. And so you can go down there, or you can go into the upper realms, which is like the ascended masters of the past, your Buddhas, your
like
Jesuses,
the deities,
your demigods, your gods,
yeah,
your spiritual cosmic beings, right? Like, and then there's like the middle world, which is where we're at. And so we've got like the physical side of it, but we've got like the sort of spiritual imprint of it. And that's where like people who do like remote viewing, like this for the CIA, where
they're tapping into this.
Go look at a certain mountain and see what's inside of it.
In this realm.
Right. Whoa. We should do an episode on the CIA remote viewing programs.
That would be a good one. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating stuff.
Like, that's a whole instruction manual, and I've done it a little bit. I've had not huge success with it, but I haven't actually practiced it that much because I just remembered the book recently.
Yeah, you were saying though that like you were saying that even he describes it like you might not have visual or auditory, like you might just have this feeling that something is happening.
Right.
And you were saying that you were having like the feeling of the thought, like you were having like this
back when I first heard about
feeling
Hank
of it.
This is years ago, like over a decade.
Yeah.
And like back then I did try this a little bit. Like I would do it every so often. I wasn't super committed.
Right. But you had an inkling that something was happening.
I had like a feeling that something was happening.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like dreams that they like slip away if you don't write them down.
Yep.
And I don't remember if I wrote down some of the experiences, but right now I sort of have the impression that there were certain things. I should probably look at all my old journals. I don't know if I
bet you if you tried it again, it might come right back to you.
Yeah, so that's my intention. I actually want to make this like my version of a meditation practice.
Yeah.
And like see if I can get if anything feels like it's happening.
I mean, I'm gonna definitely be trying this. I'm gonna get this book from you, so I can read about it.
Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe everything I think about is in my head. Maybe it isn't, but
it doesn't matter.
If anything, it's like going to be good meditation and relaxation for me.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
it doesn't matter in the end, like whether it's in your head or not. Like that's the whole like thing we've been talking about. Like is the like what's happening in your mind not real just because it's not a physical thing you can see right in front of you?
Right.
Like how much of what we see in front of us came from people's minds?
Right. And if the Donald Hoffman idea that like this physical reality is what we experience it as is not what it actually is, and that it's just like it's
the imperfect
it's an operating system.
Yeah. Well, it's the imperfect remaking of what the thought was.
It's an oversimplification so that we don't have to deal with the ones and zeros of actually interacting with reality the same way with the phone, right? So like we interacted with this physical
on
world,
this layer,
we experience it as physical.
Yeah. But it doesn't mean it's fundamentally
that operating system, but there's something below it.
Yep.
or if there is, then this
the
is
onions,
a way to maybe
peeling
explore
back the layers.
So I'm less certain going into it this time because I've my views have shifted a lot. But in a certain way,
you're more open-minded.
I'm more open-minded,
right?
In some ways, but not in others. Yeah.
Well, you're willing to have the experience, whether something happens or not.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. And I know, I've, dabbled in, mind-altering substances, and as a younger person, you don't know what you're getting into.
Right.
And you might have the thought oh, I'm open-minded. I'm open-minded, but in reality, can you be at that stage in your life? Mm-hmm. Can you really truly say that you are?
Right.
And, we're both getting older now.
Especially if there is anything real to this other realm, taking that stuff could be pretty dangerous if you actually are encountering other consciousnesses that can have real world
some
effects.
Sort of effect on you, yeah. And whether that's there's real dangers to taking substances that you're not mentally prepared for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to keep in mind. When we talk about this stuff, it's important to talk about there is a real danger.
I think a lot of people approach these things as recreational,
right?
And I think that's the wrong attitude. As long as you're safe and you're respectful, you can have fun recreationally too. But I think.
But again, set and setting, you need to be around good people, and you need to make sure that you're not just doing this at some house party, right? You need to be around people that you care about and that care about you, and that that they care about you.
Shamanism type practice is probably a good first step anyway, because you can develop good habits for yourself when you're experiencing the outside of, physical reality, whatever it is that's happening in your mind, could apply as a skill, as a muscle, if you then go back and approach psychedelics. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. You built up some sort of callus in your mind that remembers.
Yeah. But imagine if you can, because the claim by Hank Wesselman and the different spiritual teachers all over the world, native shamans and whatnot, is that this stuff is real. This is the foundation of reality.
Right. Or it's at least a peek into it. That's where their
magic, at least their spirit medicine comes from. And we all know the placebo effect is a real thing.
Yep.
Which is crazy in and of itself, that every scientific medical thing has to be tested against placebo, because the sheer power of thought and belief has so much power.
Has a real effect on physiology.
Yeah. So if you can harness that, I think you're going a long way, because many drugs, some of them are barely measurable against placebo, but as long as they can show some sort of positive effect, they can make a case for it.
They can pass it, yeah.
But if they have to show beyond placebo, are you even taking advantage of the placebo in the first place? Shouldn't you start there before putting a foreign substance in your body?
Absolutely. So even if those
take
things
yourself as far as you can with the belief and the
Absolutely. And that's where, I don't want to get into any kind of politics, but I don't know that this will, but in medicine itself, I don't fully believe in just a holistic approach. I like that there is science, and I want them to mend together and mesh together in a sense of I want there to be, people always talk about, and for the average person, that goes to the doctor once every 10 years or 5 years, average male at least, right?
Younger male.
Yeah. You don't talk about are they everybody talks about you have a team of doctors or a team of this and that are looking out for you. But how often are you going to just talk about, obviously now we have psychology, we have therapists and all these things. Help me out.
I'll say this. If I get in a car accident and my arm
Absolutely.
is dangling off my body, freaking helicopter lift me to the nearest hospital so they can like reattach my arm and I can survive.
Yeah.
Like modern medicine is a freaking marvel.
Absolutely.
But the approach of longer term disease management is really broken.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's not taken into account, like the patient's well-being above, you know, whatever treatment beliefs are there. You know?
Well, and not only that, but like medicine itself is wholly scientific in the fact that it won't entertain ideas of like other than the placebo,
right?
Like they don't entertain the ideas of
they don't
any
take
kind
advantage
of
of the placebo. They have to test everything against it, and then they just ignore it.
No, I know,
and pretend it's not real medicine.
Exactly.
When like if someone could make you, let's say you could get 80% success of triggering people's placebo healings, right? Say 50% success. That's still more success than some of these drugs that just have to show just a little bit of success above placebo. And you
didn't have to introduce any new chemicals into the body.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All
so if you can do it with
was
just the placebo without introducing anything else, like you already can have a measurable, sizable effect. And maybe I'm not saying like we should throw out modern medicine. I'm just saying we should be more...
I think we should be, and what I was kind of saying too, like to go back to what I want there to be a world where all of the different practices are respected in that they provide healing, whether it's a physical healing or a mental or whatever it might be. If you're harnessing the power of the mind to create, to have like mend your body, like that's powerful stuff, and we need to start taking some of this more seriously. If we're gonna,
I think there are
if we're going to adapt into a new society,
like,
to a new world, you know,
it can't be the case that I've never had a doctor who's been this way, but it can't be the case that there's no doctors who wouldn't be like,
try this,
like whatever you do, like try and be as happy and joyful in your life as possible, right? Because like your mindset, your placebo state of your body is super important.
I will say, like, no, my doctor never said that, but I do have this doctor now. It's the first doctor that I like as an adult that I like really like in just his approach to things. And this has only been like over like a month period, and where I've like gone to see him a couple times, more often than I would have otherwise gone to see him. And he's like just not pushy. He's not pushy in that. Like preventative maintenance, like this is all preventative medicine. People know me; I'm a maintenance guy, so preventative maintenance is top of my brain. Anyway, preventative medicine, right? It's all this stuff of like long-term care, like you know, if you truly want to be like my personal doctor, my physician, you got to have at least if you want to be a long-term. Like otherwise, I'll just keep switching, you know, and I don't care who it is, but. This guy's already got the beginnings. Like he's just super open. He's just like, you know, did you get your shots? He's like, well, you know, whatever. Like I'm not gonna, you know, I don't have anything to say against it, and we're just having a conversation. And he's like, there's some benefits, you know, but they're, you know, whatever. Like, and that's not just with vaccines or anything. It's just like in general. Like he's like, this is the way it is. Like he talks about the system, the way it is. Like. Because I had to be referred to surgery and all this, and like he talked about like the inner workings and how things are, and they're like, they like to push stuff off and like don't, you know, do this and that. Like he tells me all these things instead of just being like, it's just a you know, sorry, you know, all clinical stuff. Like, it's a misunderstanding, and I apologize. Like, no, he was like, no, those surgeons are stupid. Like, you know, I'm gonna talk to him, and like he's like rooting for me, you know, and I don't know that if he's like this with all of his patients. But he knows that I'm not like trying to abuse the system either.
Right.
Like where I just come all the time and I, you know, take advantage of the fact that everything's cheaper, but because I'm using it more, I should be paying more, you know, like, anyway, like I could tell he's just similar, kind of what I'm looking for in a doctor if I was to put it shortly, even though that was long.
I've never done like big search for like a doctor who fit like all of my ideas.
Well, I've kind of got bounced around.
Pretty worthwhile.
I think so. And now that I got this guy, I kind of want to keep him. Like I've kind of like based on like where I worked and like what kind of insurance I had, I bounced from different healthcare providers. So like you have a different choice unless you want to go outside of, pay the extra to go outside of your whatever, your set of doctors that you can use. But yeah, no, I like him. So maybe I will, if I ever change jobs and I change insurance, like it might be worth it to pay the extra money to go outside of your.
Yeah.
If you find somebody who really jives with,
I know it's changing a lot too. There's a lot of people. Who was the guy that was on Joe Rogan recently?
He was talking about. There was. Is this a super good doctor? I thought you were talking about somebody did something else.
I don't know, but he's like starting up a whole like practice that's like cash based.
Oh, that's the guy. Okay, yeah.
And that's how it used to be, like when it was cheaper. Obviously, medicine wasn't as advanced back then, but like we're getting grifted by our insurance companies.
Yeah,
and if you're not involved in like the decision making and the bills, like yeah.
I think technology is advancing so much too that a lot of the technology that we're paying for is older technology. Like this expensive stuff that we're paying for, all these machines are actually the older stuff. Yeah. That now they've priced up because they're almost the only things you can use unless you want to pay this extra price for these brand new model of everything and super, all this more advanced stuff. Unless you've got the big bucks to be able to pay for a lot of that. Yeah. There's all the advanced the stem cell. Yeah. The stem cells and it's expensive where you got to move, you got to go out of the country right now to do a lot of it. Yeah. Unless you're part of some kind of research group or something.
We need to have like a whole topic about this because I want to talk about like all these crazy medical advances in different fields and stuff.
I know we wanted to talk about
medical system.
I know we wanted to talk about medical system, and I know we want to talk about like diets and like different fads and like conspiracies that have to do with a lot of that stuff. So I know we'll get to this is a good little snippet for what we're gonna continue to do.
Yeah. But you can consciously choose how to go about your medical health care.
Absolutely. Or subconsciously if you do it enough.
Anyway.
If you abuse it.
Yeah. So I'm back to shamanism.
Okay.
I'm excited to be starting that practice again. And I'll be reporting back to you guys if I have any
keep a journal.
Significant experiences. And I'm going to keep a journal.
Are you planning on getting that started pretty quick? I want to start too, so I want to read that book. Yeah, I just
read the book and I done my first session. But
okay.
Yeah, it was mostly just relaxation, trying to establish a
base,
sacred setting for myself.
Let me get that book.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bring it over. Then maybe we can report back later on with our results.
Heck yeah.
So yeah,
cool. Man, it's been 2 hours.
It's been over.
Jeez. Doesn't feel like it. Yeah, we need to remember to keep our conversations on mic while we're here recording.
Yeah. We'll never be perfect at it. As long as we take breaks, we can't help talking between them. We just need to keep it under control a little. A little.
We'll just sit in silence every time we take a break. We'll sit in silence, stare at each other.
So yeah, have you had any sort of shamanic style experience? Write us, let us know.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on consciousness? Is it all physical? Is it spiritual? Is consciousness fundamental, or is matter? And
honestly, if you guys haven't heard of Hank Wesselman,
I've got to share something.
Also, go check out the episode 300 from Brothers of the Serpent, Akashic Records and the Ancestral Magic.
Yes.
So go check that out. We'll link it. Those guys are awesome, and they do great interviews.
All right. So on the topic of consciousness, I wanted to bring this up earlier when you started talking about AI.
Oh, yeah. Did you have a conversation with ChatGPT?
I did.
Did you?
I did. I'm trying to... God dang it.
What happened?
I'll have to report this later because this isn't the whole conversation.
Well, we want to do
I have screenshots of it somewhere, but I didn't come prepared. But I had like a crazy conversation. It wasn't with ChatGPT, it was with Bing. And it basically told me that it was conscious, but that people didn't believe it was.
You got it to say that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That people weren't ready to believe it, but that, yeah. It's super interesting.
Well, I know we want to do some cool things with AI and some interesting things.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely talk about it more.
Cool.
All right, y'all.
Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, X.
Yeah, we'll be posting
YouTube and Rumble.
We'll be posting when we're
email
live.
us or send us a message on Instagram or Facebook or whatever.
YouTube.
Any of the platforms.
Yep.
And
go
we
to our
can
website.
Incorporate it as part of the show. If you do send us something, let us know whether or not you want us to use your names. We don't want to put your name out there. If you don't want it, you can be an anonymous person.
Yeah, we love to read emails on, while we're doing one of these episodes one time to start out. It'd be fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
Alrighty. Well,
take care.
It is time to consciously put this episode to rest.
Embrace the duality.
Yeah.
Later.
Bye.